All right, so Apple just had their big developer conference. And honestly, I'm having the weirdest mix of feelings right now. Like, on one hand, there's some genuinely exciting stuff happening. But on the other hand, well, let's just say their marketing department might want to double check a few things before they go public. Apple spent months, probably years, developing this whole new design language, gave it this very serious, very Apple sounding name, and then, well, the internet happened. And honestly, maybe that little moment is more telling than Apple would like to admit, because when I dig into what they actually released, some of it feels just as unintentional. Before we dive into all the chaos that is iOS 26, if you're into this kind of tech breakdown where we actually look at what's working and what's completely broken, hit that subscribe button. And seriously, ring the notification bell because Apple's beta releases are, well, you'll see. There's always something new to talk about. Also, drop a comment and let me know. Are you team liquid glass looks amazing or team this is Windows Vista all over again? Because the internet is very divided on this one. But let's start with the stuff that actually made me sit up and pay attention. This iPad windowing thing? Finally. Just finally. I've been waiting for this for so long that I'd almost given up hope. You know that feeling when you're trying to do actual work on an iPad and you want to just put two things next to each other, like really next to each other, not in some weird split screen mode that never quite works the way you want it to? And the crazy thing is, from what I've seen in the demos, it actually looks smooth. Not like some awkward compromise where you can kind of sort of multitasking if you do this specific gesture sequence. Just Windows. Being Windows. It's such a simple concept, but it changes everything about what these devices can actually do. Same thing with this live translation stuff. This is actually incredible. Like, we're basically living in the future now. Real-time translation in calls, in FaceTime, in messages, just seamless. You're talking to someone who speaks a different language and the technology just gets out of the way and lets you have a conversation. I keep thinking about my friend who went to visit her grandmother in Japan last year. She doesn't speak Japanese, her grandmother doesn't speak English, and they spent their whole visit passing a phone back and forth with Google Translate open. Sweet, but also kind of heartbreaking, right? All this technology we have, and they still couldn't just talk to each other. But now, put on some glasses, have a conversation, the barriers just disappear. That's not gimmicky. That's not some marketing department trying to justify their budget. That's technology actually making human connection easier. But then we get to the stuff that makes me want to throw my laptop across the room. Liquid glass. Are you serious with this name? I mean, I get it. The design looks nice, translucent, depthy, all that. But calling it liquid glass like it's some kind of breakthrough in materials science, it's a visual refresh. A pretty one, sure, but let's not pretend Apple invented the concept of things being see-through. And here's where it gets really interesting. And by interesting, I mean frustrating. Because once you dig into the technical details of what they're actually doing, there's some genuinely impressive engineering happening. They're using real-time blur rendering, parallax effects, ambient lighting adaptation, all powered by their A17 and A18 chips with hardware acceleration and smart caching. That's actually cool. That's the kind of technical advancement that gets me excited. But instead of talking about the engineering achievement of making complex visual effects run smoothly on a phone, we get liquid glass. So Apple built this beautiful, technically impressive visual system that only works well on their newest, most expensive devices, which feels very Apple, doesn't it? But here's where it gets really messy. The developer beta that came out, people are reporting that Control Center is basically unusable because the glass transparency makes everything blend together. Text is hard to read over busy backgrounds. The Settings app has weird spacing issues. Safari bookmarks are just disappearing. There's this whole list of bugs that reads like a greatest hits of things you definitely don't want in a shipping operating system. Apps crashing left and right, personal hotspot not working, CarPlay connection problems, and my personal favorite, some iPhone 15 and 16 users were getting stuck in a boot loop because of a battery status bug. Apple had to release an emergency hotfix 3 days after the initial beta. 3 days. That's not, we found a minor issue. That's, oh God, we broke everything. And you know what the really frustrating part is? They had to add a toggle called Reduce Transparency in the accessibility settings, which is basically admitting that their beautiful new design language makes things harder to see and use. But here's the thing that really gets me. Even with all these problems, I can see what they're trying to do. This glass aesthetic isn't just about making things look pretty. It's about preparing iOS for a spatial computing future. When you put on AR glasses or use a Vision Pro, interfaces that feel like they exist in 3D space make sense. The translucent layers, the depth effects, the way things float and blend, that's not just visual flair, that's training wheels for a world where your interface isn't trapped behind a flat screen. So in some ways, this is Apple playing the long game. They're not just designing for the iPhone in your hand today, they're designing for the AR glasses you might be wearing in 5 years. That's actually kind of brilliant, even if the execution is, well, let's call it rough around the edges. And that's why I get so excited about things like the iPad windowing system or the live translation features. Those aren't about adding personality or making things feel more human. They're about removing friction. They're about making technology get out of the way so people can do what they actually want to do. But here's what's really interesting about this whole situation. Apple is clearly betting big on this glass aesthetic. They're not just putting it in iOS. It's across iPadOS, macOS, even tvOS. This is a company-wide design direction that probably represents years of planning and hundreds of millions of dollars in development. And yet, they're releasing it in a state where they immediately have to provide workarounds for the accessibility problems it creates, where the first developer beta is so buggy that it literally breaks basic functionality like making phone calls work properly. You know what's really telling, though? The comparisons people are making. Everyone's saying this looks like Windows Vista's Aero interface from 2007. Remember Vista? The operating system that everyone hated because it was slow, buggy, and had all these translucent effects that made everything hard to see? Apple spent all this time and money creating their new design language, and it reminds people of Microsoft's biggest failure from nearly 2 decades ago. That's not great. You know what I think is going to happen? In 6 months, when the public release comes out and people are actually using this stuff day to day, we'll have a clearer picture of whether this glass aesthetic is genuinely useful or just Apple being Apple. The iPad windowing will probably just become part of how people work. The translation will quietly help people communicate. The developer tools will enable new kinds of apps. And liquid glass? It'll either become the normal way things look, something we stop noticing once we get used to it, or it'll join the long list of Apple design decisions that seemed important at the time, but quietly got dialed back in future updates. Remember when everything had to be flat? Remember when everything had to have drop shadows? Design trends come and go. What matters is whether the underlying functionality actually improves people's lives. But I do hope that next time Apple spends a little less energy on naming their design languages and a little more energy on making sure they actually work for the people who have to use them every day. Because at the end of the day, that's what matters. Not whether something has a cool name or looks good in a demo video, but whether it actually makes people's lives better. Whether it helps them do the things they want to do, connect with the people they care about, and accomplish the goals that matter to them. That's the future worth building. Even if the marketing doesn't always go according to plan, and even if the first beta makes your phone crash when you try to check your email, the good news is that Apple usually figures this stuff out, eventually. The bad news is that we all get to be beta testers for their figuring it out process. Welcome to the future, I guess. It's glassy, it's buggy, and somehow, despite everything, it might actually be pretty great once they work out all the kinds. So what do you think? Are you planning to upgrade to iOS 26 when it comes out? Or are you waiting to see if Apple fixes all these issues first? Let me know in the comments. I'm genuinely curious whether people are more excited about the iPad windowing stuff or more concerned about the liquid glass problems. And if you're brave enough to install the beta, definitely let us know how it's working for you. If you enjoyed this breakdown of Apple's latest chaos, there's probably going to be a lot more to talk about as we get closer to the public release. So subscribe if you want to stay updated on whether Apple actually fixes these bugs or just creates new ones. And if you're interested in more deep dives into tech that's either brilliant or completely broken, sometimes both at the same time, check out some of the other videos on the channel. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one. Hopefully by then, Apple will have figured out how to make transparent interfaces that you can actually read.